The narrative opens by introducing the central figure of our tale, a young man named Jim. We find him strolling leisurely, immersed in the sounds emanating from his headphones, when his peaceful state is interrupted by an urgent summons from his closest companion, Yun. Responding instantly to the call, Jim hastens to the location of Yun's ongoing judo competition. A silent signal passes between the friends, and Jim comprehends the unspoken request. He makes his way directly to the facility's security control room and begins to manipulate the computer terminal, skillfully altering the feed from a surveillance camera to focus on a particular young woman. In truth, Jim possesses a remarkable aptitude for computing. He was simply employing his talents to provide a small favor for his friend, who had planned to make a significant romantic declaration that very day. However, his actions were interrupted by the sound of a young woman's voice, pleading, "I beg of you, why am I being prevented from participating in the match over such a minor infraction?" Intrigued by the distinct quality of her voice, Jim adjusted the camera once more to obtain a clear view of her face. This young woman is the female protagonist of our story, and her name is Saori. Several individuals were attempting to restrain her from competing due to previous injury, but despite numerous admonitions, she proceeded to enter the match. Meanwhile, Jim's attention remained fixed on the monitor, the camera angle stubbornly focused on Saori. Unfortunately, Saori was defeated in her bout. His friend Yun had already emerged victorious from his own match, yet Jim continued to watch the screen, captivated by the girl whose image now filled the display. The hopeful Yun was left waiting to execute his proposal, while Jim could only stare at Saori. At that precise moment, a squad of security personnel arrived at the control room, demanding, "Are you responsible for this interference?" Jim attempted to make a swift exit, but in his haste, he inadvertently activated a command that triggered a series of celebratory pyrotechnics. The unfortunate Jim found himself publicly embarrassed before the entire gathering. Clutching his laptop, Jim fled the scene only to collide directly with Saori in the hallway. While the moment might have appeared serendipitously romantic to an observer, Jim was seething with anger, having deduced that this young woman was the source of his current predicament. She then informed him, "Wait right there, I will instruct you properly this instant," before physically lifting him and depositing him unceremoniously on the ground. The story then provides further background on Jim. He resides with the family of his friend Yun, having lost both his mother and father. Following his father's passing, a man he refers to as Uncle Tak assumed responsibility for his care. Despite this, Jim perpetually feels he is imposing a burden on Uncle Tak's household. Later, Jim is seen at his school where a teacher admonishes him, "Your secondary education is nearly complete, yet you have not submitted your university application materials. Which institution do you intend to attend?" Jim has no particular aspirations. This absence of ambition stems from another concern: he is unwilling to incur additional financial obligations for Uncle Tak. Although he addresses him with familial respect, Uncle Tak was originally a friend of his biological father, and Jim is determined not to be a further source of strain. Consequently, his teacher suggests, "Perhaps you should consider the police university. The program is of shorter duration, the associated costs are more manageable, and it leads directly to stable employment." Immediately following this conversation, Jim receives a notification on his mobile device. He had in fact begun following Saori on a social platform, and she had posted about her acceptance to the police university. This information piqued Jim's interest, prompting him to visit the exterior of the university campus. By coincidence, Saori was also there at that time. Jim hastily concealed himself upon seeing her, though he suspected she might have glimpsed a familiar figure. Jim ultimately resolved to apply to the police university. He completed the application process but chose not to inform his family. In his online activities, he used the pseudonym Yun and maintained a digital friendship with another user known as Bird. It was to this online confidant, Bird, that he disclosed his application to the police academy. However, Jim soon received distressing news: Uncle Tak had been involved in an accident. When Jim and Yun arrived at the hospital, they discovered that Uncle Tak's injuries from the collision were not severe. However, subsequent medical examinations revealed a more grave condition. He was diagnosed with cancer and would require an imminent surgical procedure. Both young men were deeply concerned as they lacked the necessary funds for the operation. At that very moment, a news broadcast reported that an online criminal syndicate had embezzled a large sum of money and law enforcement was actively pursuing them. Yun then fixed his gaze on Jim. Jim initially refused, stating, "No, we cannot do this." Yun countered, "We are only taking a small portion for our father's medical treatment." Jim reluctantly agreed. When the illicit funds were being transferred back to police custody, he intercepted the exact amount required for the surgery. Now in possession of a substantial and unexplained sum, Uncle Tak inquired, "What is the source of this money?" Jim replied, "I earned it through part-time employment." Uncle Tak's medical procedure proceeded, but turmoil erupted at the police station. The investigators had been tracking the digital theft and were now baffled by the secondary, smaller diversion of funds. The officer leading this investigation is named Yu Dongman, a principal character in our narrative. His partner is named Park Jun. Meanwhile, Uncle Tak's condition improved post-surgery and he was discharged to return home with his two sons. Yet upon their arrival, police officers appeared to place both Jim and Yun under arrest. Uncle Tak was devastated to learn of their actions. At the station, Officer Dongman interrogated Jim, demanding, "What was your motive for taking that money?" Yun interjected, "We committed no true crime. The money was used for our father's survival. Had our intentions been malicious, we would have taken the entire sum." Overhearing this from the corridor, Uncle Tak entered and knelt before Officer Dongman, offering a profound apology. He pleaded, "These boys have their entire futures ahead of them, their university education. If they face legal charges, how will they continue? Please trust that we will repay every bit of the money gradually." Moved by this display, Officer Dongman agreed to close the case. However, he sternly told Jim, "My leniency today is solely due to your father's intervention. What you did was unequivocally wrong. Do not let me see you again." Subsequently, Uncle Tak learned that Jim had applied to the police university, and moreover had passed the written entrance examination. Elated by this development, Uncle Tak insisted on accompanying Jim to his final admission interview. Upon arriving at the interview venue, Jim grew nervous amidst the crowd of applicants, one of whom was Saori. Recognizing him as the individual she had once thrown to the ground, she approached and asked pointedly, "Have you come here because of me?" After a moment of flustered hesitation, Jim replied, "No, it has been my lifelong ambition to serve as a police officer." Saori departed for her interview and Jim was called next. When Jim entered the interview room, his eyes met those of Officer Dongman, who was serving on the interview panel. Dongman was visibly astonished. He addressed Jim directly, "You aspire to be an officer, you lack the fundamental character required. Leave this place. I instructed you not to appear before me again." The other panel members were taken aback by this outburst and attempted to mediate, suggesting Jim still be allowed a formal interview. The interview was ultimately conducted. Afterward, Dongman confronted Jim privately, "How dare you present yourself here?" It is revealed that Dongman was formerly a detective, but his failure to resolve the online fraud case, compounded by his inability to prosecute Jim, resulted in disciplinary action and a demotion. He now served as an instructor at the police university, though he continued to investigate the online syndicate covertly with his partner, Park Jun. Despite Dongman's objections, Jim passed the interview and was admitted. Uncle Tak was overjoyed and accompanied both young men to the station. Yun was departing for mandatory military training, while Jim was en route to the police university. As Jim boarded his train at the last moment, a fellow passenger offered him water. This passenger was none other than Saori, who had also been admitted. Jim could not help but stare. Upon disembarking, Jim stopped Saori and remarked, "The journey was pleasant with you." A breeze seemed to swirl around Saori as she regarded him with a slight smile. It then became apparent that Jim had merely been standing silently. He clarified, "What I meant to say was, allow me to carry your bag since we are headed to the same destination." She agreed, but the bag proved exceedingly heavy and Jim, struggling with it, accidentally broke the handle. Saori glared at him in frustration. The bag tumbled to the ground and began rolling into the street, where it was heroically intercepted by another young man named Park, who announced he was also bound for the police university and offered to carry the bag. Saori immediately accepted his assistance, leaving a dejected Jim to wonder how this rival had appeared before his own romantic prospects could even begin. New cadets arrived at the university, where a senior officer informed them that admission did not guarantee graduation. They would undergo rigorous training and failure to meet standards would result in expulsion. While exploring the campus, Jim encountered Dongman once more. Dongman reiterated, "I warned you not to cross my path." "Why are you here?" Jim retorted. "What is your issue with me? My father promised full restitution." Another cadet named Baum observed this exchange from a distance. Jim soon formed friendships with two fellow cadets, Junwook and Baum. Baum later asked Jim, "You seemed familiar with Professor Dongman earlier. Do you know him?" Jim denied any acquaintance. Their training instructor was then introduced. It was Dongman. Jim was dismayed, while Dongman appeared pleased to now have direct authority over him. To organize the training, Dongman divided the cadets into 3 teams. Park was appointed leader of the first team, Saori of the second. Several cadets volunteered to lead the third team, but Dongman deliberately appointed Jim, who had not volunteered, knowing the role carried significant responsibility. Observing this, Baum muttered, "I volunteered, yet he chose Jim. There must be some connection between them he isn't disclosing." The training commenced. Park's team excelled, Saori's team performed well, but Jim's team languished at the bottom. The team members grumbled that their leader was ineffective and lamented not being placed under Park's command. Jim overheard these criticisms, as did Saori. The next challenge was an arduous trek, which had to be completed while maintaining a physically taxing rooster stance. Initially, all teams, including Jim's, progressed adequately. However, Baum soon began to falter and could not continue. Jim, as team leader, descended to assist Baum from behind, ensuring he could finish. This act of solidarity allowed Baum to complete the trek, but Jim finished last. As punishment, Dongman ordered Jim to repeat the entire trek alone in the same stance. Bom protested, "Instructor, why punish him? The fault was mine, he was only assisting me." Dongman replied, "As the team leader, he bears responsibility for the outcome." Jim's legs were already exhausted, but he was forced to comply. His friends Junwook and Bom later sought medicinal ointment for him. As Jim rested outside, Seori brought him water. She told him, "I witnessed you being a commendable leader today. You accepted punishment for aiding a teammate. If you apply that dedication to your own performance, you will succeed." Her words reinvigorated Jim. Later, to cheer Jim, Bom and Junwook secretly procured takeaway noodles, though outside food was prohibited. Jim initially refused, but his friends insisted. Bom and Junwook each ate, but just as Jim was about to take his first bite, a security guard's flashlight illuminated him. His friends vanished, leaving Jim to face the consequences alone. Having consumed nothing, he was now forced to perform punitive exercises, his legs aching from the earlier trek. His friends watched guiltily from afar. Dongman arrived and, seeing Jim's punishment, scornfully remarked, "I knew from the start you were unfit, you are constantly being disciplined." As Dongman turned to leave, he received a call from partner Park Jun, who revealed crucial information. Their online contact, the computer expert Yun, was in fact Jim. Simultaneously, it was disclosed that Dongman's own online alias was Bird. Dongman looked at Jim with newfound understanding. Jim approached him and pleaded, "You cannot dismiss me from training. Please grant me another chance. I will apply myself diligently." However, Dongman's thoughts were consumed by the revelation of Jim's dual identity. The cadets were informed that only a few days of training remained. Energized, Bom and Junwook declared their intent to excel. Jim told Seori he would perform exceptionally well. She encouraged him, "You should, so you have no regrets." Jim smiled at her, and when she inquired why, he replied, "Your voice is remarkably similar to that of someone I admire." Seori, who was the object of his admiration, asked who this person was, but Jim demurred. She pretended indifference and began to leave. Jim called after her, "Once I am officially admitted, I will tell you her name." Jim then attempted to devise a strategy with his team, but his teammates, convinced of his incompetence, dismissed him. Only Bom and Junwook pledged to follow his lead. Jim's attention was divided, however, as he noticed Park frequently engaging Seori in conversation. Distraught, Jim sought Dongman's guidance. "I have contemplated deeply, please assist me," he implored. Dongman, now aware of Jim's online identity, rebuffed him harshly. "You made a wager with me and now seek my aid. Resolve your own matters." Dejected, Jim turned to the one person he felt he could trust, his online friend Bird, and asked for strategic advice. Though Dongman recognized the request was from Jim, he offered only vague encouragement, which nonetheless motivated Jim to improve his performance, particularly in marksmanship training. While Dongman offered no overt assistance, he provided subtle support. The training period concluded and the results were announced. With trepidation, the cadets assembled. Dongman declared that all cadets had passed and were now officially admitted to the police university. Jubilation ensued. Jim, noticing Park beside Seori, quickly interposed himself to offer her congratulations. After Park departed, Jim confessed to Seori, "I was not entirely truthful. I had no childhood dream of this profession. I came here because of my admiration for someone, and that person is you." Seori was left speechless by this admission. The following day, the formal oath-taking ceremony was held. Families attended. Uncle Tak watched with immense pride as Jim pledged his duty. At the university, the cadets met their professors, including the head professor, Seo, and their first instructor for legal studies, the stern Professor Kwon. During the inaugural class, Professor Kwon questioned the cadets rigorously. Both Jim and Park answered correctly, but when Jim was posed an exceptionally difficult question, he could not respond and was subjected to a public reprimand. Jim stood bewildered, feeling as though he had been under scrutiny since his arrival. That night, a heavy rain fell. Dongman received a call from Park Jun, who urged him not to abandon their investigation. Dongman detected a strange tension in his partner's voice before the line abruptly went silent. Alarmed, Dongman rushed to the hospital, where he found Park Jun in critical condition following a suspicious accident. Dongman was now certain the online syndicate was responsible and was more determined than ever to apprehend them. Returning to the university in a distraught state, Dongman was seen by Jim, who asked, "Instructor, are you unwell?" Dongman responded, "Yun, will you assist me? I am Bird." Jim was stunned by this revelation. Dongman explained that he had recently discovered Jim's online identity. He outlined the gravity of the situation with the syndicate and the attack on Park Jun, and formally requested Jim's computer expertise to help capture the culprits. Jim, however, was conflicted. "Is this the reason I passed the training?" he asked. Dongman assured him it was not. Jim replied, "You were the one who demanded I never break the rules again, therefore I cannot use my skills in this manner and I cannot help you." With that, Jim turned and walked away. The following day within the lecture hall, Jim found his thoughts tumultuous, consumed by the newly discovered connection between instructor Dong-man and his online confidant, Bird. His two companions, however, misinterpreted his distracted state. Assuming he was still mortified from the previous day's public reprimand, Saori approached him as well, offering consolation. "You must not dwell on it so intensely," she said softly. "I too was unfamiliar with the answer to that particular query. Incidentally, regarding your statement the other day about harboring feelings for me, was that a genuine declaration?" Jim, his mind still entangled with the implications of Dong-man's identity, was spared an immediate response by the entrance of Professor Kwon, prompting all students to return to their seats. Unexpectedly, Jim rose and began to articulate a comprehensive answer to the very question he had failed the day before. Professor Kwon, after a moment of scrutiny, conceded, "Indeed, your response is accurate." A spontaneous ripple of applause echoed through the classroom from the assembled students. Nearby, Park observed the scene, a sharp pang of resentment piercing him as he watched Jim and Saori engage in study together afterward. The sight of their proximity was difficult for him to endure. This feeling was compounded when his own roommate remarked, "It seems rather evident that Jim holds affection for Saori. He is perpetually in her vicinity." This observation compelled Park to confront Jim directly. "Do you possess feelings for Saori?" he demanded. Jim met his gaze steadily. "I do," he affirmed. Park's expression hardened. "Then a friendship between us is impossible," he stated coldly. "My own sentiments for her are equally strong." Thus, an overt rivalry was formally established between the two young men. Concurrently, instructor Dong-man had been absent from the university for several days, formally requesting leave to dedicate himself fully to his ongoing investigation. Professor Kwon, seizing the opportunity, remarked dismissively, "If your true calling is investigation, why remain here at all? A resignation would be more appropriate." A palpable tension existed between Professor Kwon and Dong-man. Their dispute was interrupted by the arrival of the composed head professor, Seo, who mediated calmly. "There is no necessity for such conflict," he stated before addressing Dong-man specifically. "Pursue your investigation if you must, but ensure it brings no harm upon our students." A new development soon rippled through the university corridors. Jun-wook rushed Jim with troubling news. "Have you heard the rumor? They are saying Saori's mother is a convicted criminal currently imprisoned." Jim was stunned by this revelation. Saori, for her part, was plunged into profound distress. A palpable chill descended around her. Fellow students avoided direct conversation and whispers followed her. Her anguish reached a peak when she discovered vile graffiti scrawled across her textbook, "Daughter of a criminal." In a furious, heartbroken gesture, she hurled the book away. It sailed through the air and struck Jim squarely on the head. Seeing what she had done, Saori fled, but Jim immediately understood the source of the projectile. Moved by empathy, he retrieved the damaged book and meticulously repaired it. Later, Saori noticed two things. Firstly, the malicious online post about her mother had vanished without a trace, and secondly, her textbook was returned to her locker, restored to its original condition. She knew instinctively this was Jim's doing. She sought him out. "Was this your work?" she asked. Jim replied simply, "Do you not approve of the book's repaired state?" Saori managed a small smile. "It is acceptable, though the decorative stickers make it feel somewhat juvenile." She then confided in him, her voice low. "The truth is, my mother is not guilty. She was wrongfully implicated in a case and has never been able to prove her innocence. I wish desperately that I could somehow aid her." This confession resonated deeply with Jim. He realized his unique skills could genuinely assist people in need, and Dong-man's plea for help echoed in his mind. He resolved to offer his assistance. He went to find Dong-man, who was deeply preoccupied with concern for his partner. Park Jun. Jim accompanied him to the hospital. Witnessing Park Jun's grave condition and Dong-man's fierce determination to secure justice solidified Jim's decision. However, his initial attempt to pledge his help was met with Dong-man's distracted resistance. Several days passed before Dong-man received the call he had been hoping for. Park Jun had regained consciousness. Elated, Dong-man rushed to his friend's bedside, believing the breakthrough in the case was at hand. He leaned close. "Tell me who is responsible for this," he urged. To his devastation, Park Jun merely looked confused. "What are you referring to?" Their supervising captain then explained that Park Jun was suffering from amnesia. All memories of the case were erased. Dong-man was shattered, his investigation seemingly back to its inception. Meanwhile, at the university, Jim waited for Dong-man's return, determined to formally commit to aiding the investigation. As Dong-man approached the campus, his attention was seized by a passing vehicle. Its license plate was immediately familiar. He had recorded the same number during his initial investigation with Park Jun. Instinctively, he gave chase. Jim, seeing Dong-man break into a run, followed without hesitation. The car belonged to none other than Professor Kwon. It sped away, but Dong-man had confirmed his sighting. He turned to Jim, breathless. "Why did you follow me?" Jim stated firmly. "Because I have decided to help you." Dong-man, surprised, searched his face. Your resolve is genuine, you will not retreat. It is, Jim affirmed. I will not retreat. The following morning during drills, Shiori found her gaze continually drifting toward Jim. A friend noticed her preoccupation. Why do you stare at Jim so intently? Is something amiss? Flustered, Shiori dismissed the question, yet to her own bewilderment Jim now appeared endearing to her. Even in his absence, thoughts of him persisted. When Jim greeted her later, she panicked, offering a curt response before walking away, leaving Jim perplexed and wondering what transgression he had committed. Dongman's suspicions were now firmly fixed upon Professor Kwon. His observations of the professor became intense and unwavering, which Kwon himself noted with growing bewilderment. Dongman enlisted Jim's aid in a surveillance plan. My suspicion rests entirely on Professor Kwon. You must engage him in conversation, provide a distraction so I may install a monitoring device in his vehicle. Jim attempted to detain the professor, but Kwon was brief and evasive. As Dongman attempted to access the car, he was discovered. Professor Kwon's voice was cold from behind him. Explain your presence at my vehicle. Before Dongman could fabricate a response, Professor Kwon continued, I comprehend you are investigating. I advised you to conduct your inquiries beyond these gates. There is no justification for involving me, and certainly no excuse for enlisting a student in your activities. A heated argument ensued, escalating toward a physical altercation until their judo instructor, Ms. Choi, intervened. Again with this conflict, she chided, separating them. How many repetitions of this must we endure? She took Dongman by the arm and led him away. In a subsequent scene, Jim visited the library, where a fellow student named Mary assisted him in gathering a stack of reference texts. They divided the load and exited the building in casual conversation. From across the courtyard, Shiori observed them, Jim speaking amiably with another young woman. A surge of irrational jealousy overtook her. She marched over, her tone sharp. Pardon me, I require Jim for a matter. She took the books from Mary's arms and steered Jim away. What is it you need, Shiori? Jim asked, confused. How many times must I remind you not to overburden yourself with texts? She retorted, thrusting the entire stack into his arms before striding off angrily. Jim was left utterly bewildered by her volatile behavior. Dongman and Jim resumed their investigative work, traveling to the location where Park Jun's accident had occurred. They located a security camera and obtained its recording. The footage once again showed Professor Kwon's vehicle in the vicinity at the critical time. Dongman's suspicion deepened toward certainty, though Jim expressed doubt. I find it difficult to believe Professor Kwon capable of such acts, he ventured. Their findings for the day were inconclusive. Afterwards, they visited a bar situated near the university. As Dongman shared a slip of paper containing phone numbers for Jim to trace, the bar's owner, known as Gossi Beer, bumped into their table, spilling a drink over Dongman. The owner profusely apologized for the clumsy accident. The university faculty organized a social gathering for the new cadets at that very bar. Students engaged in games where the loser was obliged to take a drink. Jim, after several rounds, had consumed more than was prudent. When he lost again, Mary offered, I will drink in Jim's stead. This act of camaraderie ignited Shiori's jealousy. She stood abruptly. For what reason would you drink on his behalf? She demanded. The gathering fell silent, all eyes on her, including Jim's wide, surprised gaze. Why are you all staring at me? She challenged, before decisively taking Jim's hand. You come with me. She led him away from the bar. By the time they neared the university dormitories, the hour was late. Bom and Junwook, who had skipped the party, were anxiously waiting, aware that the dormitory warden was conducting room checks. The warden, suspecting a curfew violation, was patrolling with determination. Meanwhile, Jim, in his inebriated state, was talkative and loud. Shiori desperately tried to quiet him. The warden will discover us, you must be silent, she whispered urgently, even placing a hand over his mouth. As they hid, the door to their hiding place began to creak open. Shiori pressed closer to Jim in the confined space to remain concealed. The warden flung the door open, but it was not their hiding spot. Instead, it revealed Instructor Choi in a private moment, engaged in an enthusiastic solo dance. The warden was momentarily speechless. Shiori quickly extracted herself from Jim. The door to their actual room was then opened by Park, who was startled to find them together in the hallway. The next morning, Jim awoke to the intense curiosity of his friends. What transpired last night? Bom demanded. Why did Shiori arrive with Park to deliver you here, and she insisted we tell no one? You were with her yesterday. Explain the situation at once. Jim was blank. What occurred? I recall nothing. He descended to the common area and saw Shiori, but she pointedly ignored him. He intercepted her. Shiori, I must apologize for last night. She paused. So you remember everything? In truth, I remember nothing, he admitted. Her expression cooled. Your lack of memory does not negate the events, she said. At least you recalled my name, though you appear to have forgotten all else. She left in a temper. Shiori had in fact lost her identification card during the previous night's escapade and was searching frantically. Instructor Choi summoned them both. Are you seeking this? She asked, holding up the missing ID. She smiled knowingly. I was the one who provided your diversion last night with my performance. I observed your little adventure. You two are involved, correct? Very well, you have my discretion. Here is your card. Later, Jim approached Sayori with solemn earnestness. I am prepared to accept responsibility for whatever may have happened. Sayori studied him. So your memory has returned. Within moments she saw through him. You recall nothing. There is no need for this pretense. Another disagreement ensued and she departed. Dongman and Jim's investigation continued. Their scrutiny of Professor Kwon eventually yielded no concrete evidence of wrongdoing, clearing him from suspicion. Their attention shifted to a new figure, Gossi Beer, the bar owner whose establishment was a frequent haunt for university staff and students, making him a repository of overheard conversations and potential information. The university announced a major sports competition, dividing the student body into two teams, black and white. Park was assigned to the black team while Jim, Sayori and surprisingly Dongman were all on the white team. The prize for the winning team was a highly coveted day of leave. Jim was fiercely motivated. He wanted the holiday for Sayori to visit her mother and for himself to see his father. He implored Dongman, instructor, you must assist us in winning this event. He also pledged to Sayori, I will secure this victory for you so you may have that day with your mother. Sayori was touched by his dedication. The day of the competition arrived. The final event was a climactic relay race between Jim and Park's teams, the outcome deciding the holiday. Before the starting signal, Park issued a personal challenge to Jim. If I win today, I will confess my feelings to Sayori. Jim accepted the challenge, confident in his own victory. The race commenced. Jim ran with everything he had, his team maintaining a slight lead. As he approached the final leg, a notification alert buzzed on his smartwatch, a security breach warning from his laptop back in his dormitory room. A terrible realization dawned. He faced a paralyzing choice: finish the race and secure the day off for Sayori, or abandon it immediately to protect their investigation and assist Dongman. Believing the latter to be of paramount importance, he made a split-second decision, veering off the track mid-race and sprinting toward the dormitories. The crowd, including a bewildered and hurt Sayori, watched in shock as Park crossed the finish line victorious. Jim burst into his room to find it violated. A cherished family photograph lay shattered on the floor and his laptop showed clear signs of unauthorized access. The perpetrator was gone. Dongman arrived shortly after but was then intercepted by a familiar figure. Park Jun, what are you doing here? Dongman asked. Park Jun smiled. From this point forward, I am also a professor at this institution. Meanwhile, Jim sought out Sayori to explain his abrupt departure. He found her already in conversation with Park, who was in the midst of a heartfelt confession of his feelings. Jim's heart sank. He turned and left without a word. Jim later confronted Dongman, furious and frightened. He showed him the destroyed photograph. Look what they have done. This is the consequence of my involvement. During their heated exchange, Dongman dropped his phone. As he retrieved it, he noticed a small, covert recording device attached nearby. He signaled Jim to silence, removed the device and deactivated it. This confirms my suspicion, Dongman whispered. Gossi Beer was present at the festival today. I will confront him. Jim, now visibly afraid, gripped his arm. Instructor, I am terrified. Did you see what they did to my family? Dongman tried to reassure him. Fear is precisely their objective. Do not yield to it. Jim's suspicion then turned toward the new arrival. I do not comprehend how your partner could so suddenly appear as a professor. My suspicion falls on him. Dongman was defensive. He is my friend. I trust him implicitly. He is here to aid our investigation. Jim found this assertion difficult to accept. The following day, despite the black team's victory, the faculty magnanimously granted all students the day of leave. A bus was prepared to transport students from the campus. As Jim finally boarded after a final, fruitless argument with Dongman about investigating Park Jun, he discovered Sayori had waited for him. Why did you not take the earlier bus? He asked. First, tell me why you lied, she countered, her anger resurfacing. Why did you truly abandon the race? He offered no satisfactory answer. They ended up traveling together on a public bus, Sayori heading to the courthouse for her mother's hearing. Jim, unwilling to leave her alone, followed. You should not be here, she insisted, embarrassed. Leave or I will break your legs. Jim remained stubbornly at her side. Park also appeared, offering support which further flustered Sayori. During the proceedings, both Jim and Park gleaned that the case implicating Sayori's mother was intricately linked to the very online syndicate Dongman was pursuing. The revelation shocked Jim. After the hearing, Sayori insisted both young men depart. Park complied, but Jim silently followed her to the bus terminal where they made a dismal discovery. The last returning bus had already departed. It seems we have no alternative but to remain here tonight, Jim said. My family home is nearby. You are welcome to stay there if you are comfortable. With limited options, Sayori reluctantly agreed. During the walk, Jim gathered the courage to ask, are you and Park involved? Shiori answered swiftly, "No, certainly not. Whoever suggested that is mistaken." A wave of relief washed over Jim. Upon arriving at his home, however, Jim was met with silence. His father was absent. A cold dread seized him, memories of the shattered photo flooding back. He rushed outside, calling out in panic. His alarm turned to immense relief when Uncle Tak appeared moments later, carrying groceries. That evening, Uncle Tak prepared a warm meal for Jim and his guest. After dinner, Shiori addressed the sleeping arrangements with characteristic directness. "I will be utilizing your room for the night. You may find somewhere else to sleep." To her slight surprise, Jim seemed genuinely pleased by this arrangement. The following morning, Jim and Shiori made their way back to the university together. As they walked, Jim turned to her, his expression earnest. "Please do not be burdened by anxiety," he said. "I will uncover the truth behind your mother's situation." Shiori was taken aback by his confident declaration. Sensing her surprise, he continued, "There is something you should know. Instructor Dongman and I have been conducting a covert investigation into this very matter. That is the true reason I was compelled to abandon the race." This revelation left Shiori both shocked and intensely curious, pressing him for more details. Jim, however, held firm. "I must ask for your patience at this moment. I am unable to divulge further information now, but I give you my word that I will explain everything to you fully when the time is right." Unbeknownst to Jim, his conversation was overheard. Concurrently, Dongman, now wrestling with profound suspicion toward his own partner, sought the expertise of Professor Seo, a respected forensic specialist within the university. He requested a confidential analysis of the fingerprints recovered from Jim's tampered laptop. Professor Seo, recognizing the gravity of the situation, agreed to assist. When the results were delivered, Dongman was stricken with disbelief. The fingerprints belonged unequivocally to Park Jun. As Dongman exited the lab, grappling with this betrayal, Jim approached him. "I wish to reiterate my position," Jim stated firmly. "I have no intention of withdrawing from this investigation. You have my full support." At that precise moment, Park Jun himself arrived on the scene. The three men stood in a tense triangle. Jim, dispensing with niceties, addressed Park Jun directly. "Explain your actions regarding my personal computer." Park Jun feigned ignorance. "Whatever are you referring to?" he replied, then turned an accusatory gaze toward Dongman. "You should control your student. How can he make such baseless allegations?" Dongman drew his friend aside, his voice low and strained. "Tell me truthfully, what was your purpose with his laptop?" Park Jun appeared momentarily startled before offering a dismissive explanation. "I was merely examining it, nothing more." Before Jim could interject again, Dongman tersely instructed Park Jun to leave. Park Jun complied, departing swiftly in a waiting taxi. The next day found Jim in the university library, where he gathered his courage to invite Shiori for coffee. She accepted immediately. As they sat with their drinks, Shiori steered the conversation back to the topic that preoccupied her. "When will you feel at liberty to discuss the investigation with me?" Jim, seeking a momentary respite from the pressure, offered a tentative smile. "Perhaps we could speak of matters between us rather than the case." A faint blush colored Shiori's cheeks. "I have no desire to speak of that. My mother's fate is entangled in this. My concern lies solely with the case." Jim's expression turned apologetic. "I am still not at liberty to share those details." Elsewhere, Park Jun was engaged in a hushed, urgent conversation with an unseen individual. "I implore you, grant me clemency for this error. It will not be repeated," he pleaded. He was then handed a photograph of Dongman. A climate of intense academic focus settled over the university as examination preparations commenced. Jim attempted to study alongside Shiori, but his concentration continually drifted toward her. Noticing his distraction, Shiori remarked with a mixture of admonishment and concealed pleasure, "Your comprehension might improve if you directed your gaze toward the textbooks rather than at me." It was evident she was not entirely displeased by his attention. This period of relative normalcy was shattered by a scandal. An exam paper had been leaked, and preliminary evidence pointed directly at Dongman. Incensed by this blatant frame-up, Jim went immediately to head Professor Seo to demand answers. Professor Seo presented the circumstantial case. "Our review of security logs shows you meeting with him with notable frequency. What is the nature of these encounters?" Such repeated, private visits understandably raise questions. "While formal charges are not yet filed, he has been detained for questioning. Should you possess evidence of his innocence, now is the moment to present it." Exiting the office, Jim was met by Shiori and his two loyal friends, Bom and Junwook. "The last time I saw him was before the paper was even printed," Jim told them, his resolve hardening. "I believe he is attempting to shield me from involvement, but I will not allow him to be falsely accused. I will prove this is a fabrication." His friends echoed his determination. "Do not bear this weight alone, we stand with you." Emboldened, the quartet embarked on their own mission to clear Dongman's name, their youthful fervor making them feel like a team of heroes embarking on a great quest. During their collaborative efforts, Jim and Saori found themselves working in close proximity. Park, observing this from a distance, was consumed by jealousy. He approached Saori, his tone strained. "Have you reached a decision regarding my confession?" Saori replied with gentle firmness. "I believe I provided my answer previously." A flashback revealed that when Park had first confessed, Saori had kindly but clearly stated they could only ever be friends. Now, faced with his persistence, she reiterated, "My feelings are for someone else." When Park pressed, "Is it Jim?" she remained silent, which was answer enough. Jim's parallel investigation into the exam leak yielded a critical breakthrough. All evidence traced back to Park Jun. He had secured proof. Simultaneously, Dongman received a phone call where the caller claimed responsibility. A call that originated, in fact, from Park Jun, who appeared to be orchestrating a complex ruse. Armed with their evidence, Jim and his friends raced to the police station. They arrived to find Park Jun already there, voluntarily confessing to the leak. A devastated Dongman confronted him. "What possible motive could you have?" Park Jun offered no explanation as he was led away for formal interrogation. Under questioning, Park Jun began to divulge information about the online syndicate, but was abruptly silenced by a sharp, threatening glare from the investigating officer. The officer then revealed a photograph of Park Jun's family, making it horrifyingly clear that Park Jun was not the mastermind, but a pawn being coerced by a shadowy figure holding his loved ones hostage. Dongman, having returned to the university, was mired in grief and confusion over his friend's actions. His suspicions now intensified toward the bar owner, Gossy Beer. Saori, meanwhile, presented herself to Jim with a new request. "I wish to participate actively in the investigation." Jim refused, concerned for her safety. "It is too dangerous and your personal connection makes it unwise." Saori, however, was resolute. "Will you agree, or must I take my petition directly to Instructor Dongman?" She then added, her voice softening but firm, "And there is another matter. My feelings for you are genuine and I do not intend to retract them." Jim stood speechless, stunned by her directness. "Have you been rendered mute?" she asked. "Will you not respond?" Wordlessly, Jim drew her into an embrace. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "The sentiment you express. It has resided within me for a very long time." A shared, relieved smile passed between them. Jim later attempted to discuss the investigation's next steps with Dongman, but the instructor, haunted by the betrayal of Park Jun and fearing for Jim's safety, was adamant. "You must distance yourself from this entirely," Dongman insisted, his voice weary with guilt. "I deeply regret ever involving you. At your age, your responsibilities should be your studies and your future, not this darkness. You should be embracing life, not chasing shadows." The following day, Head Professor Seo summoned Jim with troubling news. Dongman had submitted his resignation. "I have not yet processed it," Professor Seo said. "I believe you may be the one to persuade him to reconsider." Alarmed, Jim discovered that Dongman had indeed withdrawn, intending to pursue the investigation alone and isolated. Jim immediately enlisted Bom and Junwook, and together with Saori, they vowed to find Dongman and rejoin the fight. Dongman's solitary pursuit had zeroed in on Gossy Beer, whom he suspected was preparing to flee. As Dongman moved to intercept him, the four students located their instructor. Confronted by his determined protagonist, Dongman was both surprised and exasperated. "You have enlisted them as well," Jim confirmed. "They are here to assist." Saori added her plea, "Instructor, my mother's justice depends on this. Please allow us to help." Bom and Junwook voiced their unwavering support. Finally relenting, Dongman welcomed them to his home, where they were joined by Professor Kwon and Instructor Choi, who had come out of concern and were now briefed on the case. This unlikely alliance formed a unified team. They successfully apprehended Gossy Beer, who offered a swift and surprisingly easy confession. Yet something felt amiss. The man had discarded his phone, and his compliance seemed theatrical. Nevertheless, with an arrest made, the group allowed themselves a moment of respite, visiting a beach to unwind. As Jim and Saori walked hand in hand along the shore, Bom and Junwook, nodding their obvious romance, conspired to give the couple privacy. They discreetly departed, sending a text message that read, "Apologies, but we have taken the vehicle. Public transport from this location has ceased for the evening. You will need to arrange your own return." Though initially flustered, Jim and Saori found themselves content in each other's company. While browsing a small market, Saori admired a simple bracelet. Jim noted her interest, but she did not purchase it. Back at the university, Professor Seo admonished Dongman. "Utilizing students in a police investigation is highly inappropriate." Dongman was startled. "This was a private matter." "How are you aware of this?" Professor Seo revealed. "Professor Kwon informed me." Furious, Dongman confronted Kwon. "We agreed this would remain confidential. Why did you disclose it?" Kwon defended his actions. "Professor Seo is our senior. I cannot withhold such information from him." With the start of a new semester came a reshuffling of dormitory assignments. Jim found himself assigned as Park's roommate, a situation agreeable to neither young man. Jim had in fact purchased the very bracelet Saori had admired. Returning to his new room, he noticed an expensive, elegantly boxed bracelet on Park's desk, undoubtedly intended for Saori. Comparing it to his own modest gift, Jim felt a pang of insecurity and left the room without his present. In the hallway, Saori noticed he was concealing something in his hand. "What are you hiding? Show me," she insisted. Jim refused. Later, Saori discovered the expensive bracelet on her desk and, assuming it was from Jim, put it on. She sought him out to show him, asking how it looked. Jim's heart sank, believing she was wearing Park's gift. His pained confusion was evident. Park, seeing Saori with the bracelet, approached her cheerfully. "I am delighted you are wearing my gift." The truth now revealed, Saori was mortified. She confronted Jim angrily. "You knew this was from Park and said nothing. Why would you withhold that?" Jim, hurt and defensive, admitted, "How could I tell you I could only afford a humble trinket while he presented you with something so lavish?" He finally showed her the bracelet he had bought. Saori's expression softened instantly upon recognizing the design she had loved. "What sort of partner are you?" she chided gently. "Allow me to wear it." Jim fastened the bracelet around her wrist. Despite the arrest, Dong Man's instincts warned him the case was not closed. He visited the imprisoned Park Jun, seeking the final truth. "Is Gossi Beer truly the architect of all this?" Park Jun did not answer directly but reminded him, "Recall what I once told you, the real culprit is within the police university." This statement crystallized Dong Man's suspicion, for Gossi Beer was an outsider. The true mastermind remained at large. While returning from this disquieting meeting, Dong Man was involved in a severe, suspicious accident. The news brought Jim, Saori, and their friends rushing to the hospital. A doctor handed Jim Dong Man's personal diary. Its contents made it devastatingly clear. The investigation was far from over and the real enemy was still active. Saori, reading the diary alongside Jim, was gripped by terror. She realized that with Dong Man incapacitated, Jim, who had taken up the mantle of the investigation, would likely become the next target. She, along with Bom and Junwook, pleaded with Jim to cease his involvement. Jim, however, was immovable in his pursuit of justice. His two friends, though fearful, pledged to stand by him. Saori, feeling her warnings were being ignored and fearing for his life, made a desperate, symbolic gesture. She removed the bracelet he had given her and returned it, a clear ultimatum implying a separation if he continued. While his friends supported his choice, Saori's opposition created a painful rift. In her distress, she began spending more time with Park, a development that caused Jim considerable anguish. Undeterred, Jim and his two friends devised a plan to access restricted administrative documents. Bom and Junwook were apprehended during the attempt, a capture orchestrated by Saori herself, who hoped that stopping his friends would force Jim to abandon his perilous course. Instead, Jim infiltrated the restricted area alone, compelling Saori to follow in a desperate bid to protect him. All three faced the university disciplinary committee. As the committee prepared to deliver its verdict, Dong Man, having discharged himself from the hospital, arrived to intervene. "Those two acted solely on my instructions," he declared. "Any punishment should fall upon me." Jim countered, "The responsibility is mine. I conceived the plan." In the end, all three received sanctions. Bom and Junwook were assigned menial labor, and Jim was suspended from the university. During his illicit foray, however, Jim had secured vital evidence, a list of names. He delivered this to Dong Man. Together, they confronted the imprisoned Gossi Beer, pressing him for the identity of his superior. Gossi Beer issued a sinister warning: "Cease your inquiries unless you wish to share the fate of your friend Park Jun." It was confirmed he was acting under another's command. The name at the top of Jim's list was the most shocking of all: Head Professor Seo. Confronted with the evidence, Professor Seo confessed. He was the mastermind behind the online syndicate. His motive was not greed but desperation. His son, a police officer, lay in a coma following an accident, and the exorbitant medical costs had driven Seo to create a fraudulent charity, embezzling funds to save his child. While his paternal love was understandable, his methods were unequivocally criminal. Hearing this confession, Jim experienced a profound moment of self-reckoning. He saw a dark parallel between Seo's actions and his own theft for his father's surgery. He realized that a noble end could never justify illicit means. This epiphany led Jim to a difficult decision. He voluntarily withdrew from the police university. He met Saori one final time, explaining, "I have come to understand the mistake I made even in trying to save my father. I am not yet worthy of the badge. I must leave, but my feelings for you remain unchanged." Saori, through her tears, replied, "My feelings are unchanged as well. I will wait here for your return." Time passed. Jim remained at home, adrift. Then, several months later, a formal letter arrived. Through the concerted efforts of Dong Man and Professor Kwon, who argued for leniency and recognition of Jim's ultimate integrity and assistance, Jim was granted readmission to the police university. He returned, though he was now a junior, his former classmates now his seniors. Bom and Junwook greeted him with overwhelming joy. Saori met him, silently displaying the simple bracelet still fastened around her wrist. They reunited at the very spot where they had parted. Jim made a solemn promise: "I will never again choose to leave you." Saori, her smile tempered with her characteristic fierceness, replied, "See that you do not. If you attempt it, I shall break your legs to ensure you cannot walk away." The narrative concludes with the sight of a police graduation ceremony. Bom, Junwook, Seori and Park stand in uniform, taking their oaths as commissioned officers. Jim, still in his junior cadet uniform, watches from a respectful distance, his own path of redemption and learning now firmly underway, his future and his heart finally secure.